Hello and welcome to week 5 of Organization, Leadership, and Decision Making. Our agenda today, we'll go a bit over the assignments as we always do, and then we'll talk a bit about the reading and the chapters that you're to have read. So moving on to the assignments. Uh, this week we're talking about power and leadership. By the end of the week, you should be able to comprehend how leadership power relates to bullying within organizations and the impact to productivity. Understand how organizational culture impacts productivity. So you're to have to read chapters 3 and 4. I discussed chapter 3 in last week's lecture, so if for some reason you skipped that, you might want to go back and listen to my discussion of it there. We'll be discussing chapter 4 during this reading. Looking ahead to next week, the discussion is, or I'm sorry, to this week's discussion, you're to basically discuss what power is in the context of leadership and how it relates to bullying within organizations. Note how this has an impact on productivity. So do you think productivity goes up whenever people are being bullied? It's an interesting discussion, and it would be an interesting study. I think you would find, though, long term, the impact would be quite negative. Discuss what organizational culture is and how it impacts work productivity, and note how organizational culture impacts the success of innovation implementation. So, how does culture impact leadership? Can culture be seen as a constraint on leadership? Looking ahead to week 6. During week 6, we'll cover information about how organizational leadership influences innovation and being intentional with innovation implementation. By the end of the week, you'll be able to critique how attribution theory relates to the influence of innovation technology. And in week 6, you'll be doing another written assignment. You'll be discussing the article which you're to read that week. You're going to provide a high-level summary overview of the case study. You're going to talk about the constructive, how constructive intentionality impacts innovation implementation. And then you'll find another article that adds to the overall findings of the case and note how attribution-based perspective enhances successful innovation implementation. Please be explicit and detailed in answering this question. We'll talk more about that next week, and this will be the rubric that goes with all of our written papers. As always, you'll want to shoot for the excellent column, and you can view this both on the assignment and it should be also available elsewhere. Moving on to the reading for this week and a discussion of organizational leadership, and we're still in part 1, contextualizing leadership, but we're down to chapter 4 now, culture and leadership. So after this chapter, you should be able to explain the nature of culture and its relationship to organizational culture, to critically evaluate how organizational leaders seek to change or manage the culture of an organization. And then you should be able to appreciate critical perspectives on culture and alternative cultural perspectives toward market relationships. So, introduction. What is culture? Is used to describe the internal behavior and processes in an organization or in a workspace. So there's culture in the sense of national culture, but there's also culture in the sense of a workspace, so corporate culture. It's referred to as an external social, economic, and political forces that form part of the external context of organizations. So organizations operate also within a culture. Cultural theorists believe that culture is central to all aspects of organizational life. So culture is a big deal, be it corporate culture or the culture in which the organization is existing. So the nature of national cultures. So this is the culture at a national level. Identifies 3 usages of the words culture, which are based upon social values, norms, and assumptions which people may or may not always be aware of. So you may be existing inside of a culture and you're not necessarily aware of that culture, maybe because you were born into it. as a process of intellectual, spiritual, or aesthetic development, as a reference to a particular way of life, as a reference to the arts. So culture can also be related to the cultural sense in arts, as in like theater or painting or whatever it might be. But it is a term that is oftentimes referred to more in the sense of the behaviors and the values of a group of people. Um, Another way of looking at it is defined as the values, norms, habits, and ways of life characteristic of a coherent social group. The idea of national identity can be securely or socially malleable, so it may change over time, and it can be constructed and reconstructed as necessary, and it's potentially changing and evolving. So that's speaking to the concepts of a national culture and continuing that concept. The term socialization is used to describe how members of a society learn and embed various layers of culture, both internalizing the norms and values of society, and also by uh, learning to perform social rules. So socialization is whenever you're becoming part of a culture. Uh, it also can be described as the concept of directing us to notice the pattern in social engagement and behavior. So it's becoming aware of what's already going on. Although the multicultural, multinational company has been theorized as very embodic of disembodied society. That is, it has severed all dependencies in social institutions in its domestic base. Business leaders are nonetheless exposed to and influenced by national culture. So even if you work for a big international organization, each of those branches of that organization are going to be executing inside of a particular culture. So it's something to be aware of. The 9 cultural dimensions found by House et al. In 2014 are uncertainty, avoidance, or the extent to which the society relies on rules to avoid uncertainty, power, distance, or views about the extent power should be unequally distributed, institutional collectivism, which refers to identification of broader societal interests compared with individual goals, in-group collectivism, expression of pride in social organizations and families, gender egalitarianism, which refers to the promotion of restriction of gender equalities, and assertiveness, the encouragement of toughness as opposed to submissiveness, and future orientation, the forward planning and support for change compared with support for traditionalism. Performance orientation to the extent to which people are encouraged and rewarded for improved performance, and human orientation, the degree to which culture support for fairness and concern for others. So those are the roughly the 14 sort of characteristics or dimensions of culture that has been identified. Talking about it a bit more uh, around the nature of national cultures, if we consider the Anglo group, which is made up of the US and the UK, it's often found to be more competitive, results oriented, and less attached to families than some cultures. They also seem to favor charismatic and value driven leadership over some other forms. But whenever we talk about this, we need to understand that societies are complex. There are subcultures within a given culture based upon class, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, region, religion, lots of other factors that will go into what makes a culture be a culture. So you can't look at it at, oh, well, that's the US. Within the US, there are a great many subcultures. Um, and that's where we're talking about things being fractured and fractious, and values are always openly contested within different parts of the country and in different parts of even within a given city. There are different values and different beliefs, and they don't necessarily align. So as an organization, we may need to keep that in mind. And also, there's the whole concepts of dominant subcultures and countercultures. The idea of a dominant culture is that it implies that that in a society with diverse cultures and class divisions, a ruling class is able to persuade most of the population that its values and worldview should be what's prevalent. Uh, it is widely held in many sociological perspectives that a shared belief system or a ruling class ideology has a crucial role in maintaining social order in class societies. A culture can never be completely dominant, as there's always the possibility that competing values will exist, and or that the experience of some sections of society, such as the poor, will through their life experiences fail to completely be convinced of the legitimacy of the ruling ideology. So because there are subcultures, not everybody is on the same page, so to speak, as to the same belief system. They believe different things and have different life experiences, leading them maybe not to accept what they're being told blindly. And in with society, or even within the work organization, there may be groups who do not share the dominant values, but express themselves through different values and symbols such as dress codes or language. Some of those groups are going to be stigmatized in society for their subculture and may provide ways of coping and supporting for their self-respect and identity. So they may behave a certain way as a reaction to how they've been treated as a group. Where a subculture opposes or inverts the values of the dominant culture, it may be regarded as a counterculture. They purposely take on beliefs that are opposite of that of the overall or the dominant culture. A counterculture may be a symbolic resistance to the dominant culture, or even a solution for its members as they can find more positive self-definition within that culture. So they seem to fit better within this counterculture than they do in the broader dominant culture. So when we talk about understanding of organizational culture, continuing that thread, national cultures embodied within people may need to be understood because they interweave explicitly and predictably with people's thinking and actions inside the workplace. And for leaders, they provide choices for who will be in various situations. Although national culture is basic to social interaction, organizations are typically best seen as existing in a broader cultural context with a variety of societal, industrial, regional, class, and occupation, etc., culture interplaying. The current trend in mainstream management literature about corporate culture is that leaders' influence and power causes others to act. So, continuing the thread of understanding organizational culture, central to this vision of corporate culture is the idea that the right corporate vision, mission statement, or leader or organization can build a highly committed, unified culture that fosters productivity and profitability. However, the cultural control can help to reduce ambiguity and reinforce organizational processes. It can also encourage groupthink and hinder critical thinking and can lead to unproductive activities and mistakes. The term organizational culture can be found in the literature to describe a system of shared values and beliefs co-produced by leaders and followers, which seek to reinforce employee behavior as to achieve the organization's goals. However, the organizational culture is permeated by the broader social culture as it is made a multiplicity of cultural orientations. So there's a lot there to think about, but the iceberg metaphor is pretty good about explaining that a lot of it of what makes up an organization's culture may lie beneath the surface. Continuing the discussion of organizational culture, uh, in contrast to organizational culture, which reflects the visible, invisible, and intangible dimensions of an organizational life, organizational climate relates to managers and other employees' evaluation of tangible workspace attributes. Uh, it can be defined as climate as employees' perceptions of formal policies, the procedures that translate policies into guidelines, and the practices that act upon them. Climate is conceptualized as an artifact of organizational culture. Organizational culture and organizational climate are two complementary constructs, but reveal overlapping nuances in the social and psychological life of complex organizations. The former, referring to um, organizational culture, tends to take a sociological approach, using qualitative methodologies to examine symbolic and cultural forms of organizations. So to understand organizational culture, the following diagram can kind of somewhat describe that culture has something to do with artifacts. There's languages and values and assumptions. Climate is also around employees' perceptions, leaderships, and managers' behaviors. The perspectives on organizational culture. Leadership scholars adopt different perspectives from cultural theorists on the study of organizational culture. Um, and I'll let you review that as a reader. Contemporary literature identifies four perspectives: the managerialist, an organizational wide set of values devised by senior managers in order to produce a committed and loyal workforce through managing employees, focuses on the role of leaders, their style of leadership, and the kinds of culture most appropriate to achieving their goals. The symbolic, interactionist shared meanings produced by workers in management in regular routine contact. It is not fixed but subject to negotiation over time. Um, the social conflict, rooted in Marx's analysis of capitalism, assumes that conflict is a basic feature of all organizations as members struggle for control over scarce resources. Values and beliefs are assumed to develop to maintain the power and control of management. Um, is characterized by ambiguity change, and so exposes the truth claims of monolithic and a unified corporate culture, exposing the naivete of thinking that there is no ambiguity in what culture members believe and do. Feminist, gender is central aspect of an organizational analysis. Gender, defined here as the patterned, socially produced distinctions between female and male, female and masculine, feminine and masculine, is crucial for understanding how people encounter support, encouragement, and skepticism in organizational contexts. Gender analysis is important because some organizations, schools, media, directly play a part in socializing processes in which people acquire gender identities. In terms of cultural change strategies, uh, basically there are three perspectives that you can view within organizational culture and leadership. The role of leaders in creating an organizational culture, leadership as maintenance and reproduction of organizational culture, and culture as framing and reframing by leadership. So while HR may ostensibly be able to create a particular culture during the organization's formative years, um, other complexities and other influences than founder values often undermine the impact of the latter. There are also other influencing factors such as culture as a constraint on leadership, ideology as part of the culture, and the role of employee engagement and voice. And with that, we conclude our discussion of Chapter 4, focused on culture and leadership. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. That's what I'm here for. Stay safe, and we will talk again next week.